And a very good evening to you all. Welcome. This is the Synth Network show live here on Sunday, the 11th of October. It's 8 p.m. here in the UK. And today we have a special, essentially, because of SynthFest Virtual 2020, which is this is the second day of that event. Most of the stuff happened yesterday, but we're kind of rounding things off for the weekend. And our thinking was that whenever you go to SynthFest, there's generally a panel discussion where some luminaries from the synthesizer industry, artists, manufacturers, developers, so on and so forth, will sit behind a table and talk about the subject at length and in depth and take questions from the audience. So I thought, well, why don't we do that? So that's what we're going to do today. Not the regular show. We're not going to do any news topics or anything like that. It's just going to be discussing a particular subject, which is the future of synthesis. It's a pretty broad topic, and we are joined as ever by our regular co-hosts, Mr. Ben Simpson and Cryss, and we are specially joined today by our special guest, Simon Alexander. Welcome to all of you.
Hello.
Oh yeah.
All very quiet. There's me building you up, and then it's just like, hello. So, hi guys, hope you're all well. Ben, just very quickly, how's things with you?
Good, very good. Having a couple of synchronization problems in the studio, but apart from that, everything's going quite well.
And it's looking rather good, I have to say.
Thank you very much.
Excellent stuff. Cryss, over there in California, how are you, and been up to much?
Yeah, I'm doing all right over here, although it's been a very sad week and don't really get too much caught up into celebrity stuff. But Eddie Van Halen,
of course,
is one of my favorites, probably my favorite guitarist and fantastic musician, obviously very important for the synthesizer world. So yeah, mourning his loss and the loss of future albums.
Indeed, it was a tragic loss, but at least we have an incredible body of work to continue to celebrate. So let's come back over to the UK and speak to our good friend Simon Alexander, who I have billed in his lower third as a synth collector extraordinaire. And I have resisted the temptation so far, but you've changed the angle, mate, and I'm not sure if I can actually do Simon's Infinite Synth Cave. But it does look, impressive with the Waldorfs behind you there, and the Lin. Well, you teasing me.
Yes, but I've got competition now with Ben.
This is true.
Ben's close on my tail now.
Yeah, I don't think all my synths had paid for that rack behind you, to be honest.
I tell you what, I think we all need to get some. What do they call it? Your fancy lighting there, because I'm just like, I'm glaring here, and Cryss is always kind of this kind of glowy orangey stuff there. We all need to get some mood lighting, and then.
Well, Cryss has got some at the top. He's got.
Oh yeah, he's got that. Yeah. So all right, so I'm the odd one out. Okay.
Yeah, Ben has definitely got some blue, but he's not blue tonight. And yeah.
Anyway.
I actually remember, Rob, the first time I came into your studio as is now.
I was always going to say
it was
that.
like. No. There was only like 2 keyboards. Now it's a real sort of plethora of Yamaha history there, isn't it?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, because I think I just had the Fusion and the.
There's nothing there.
It's come along. I'm just waiting for the floor to cave into the kitchen downstairs. Well, anyway, so welcome to everybody in the chat room. All the regulars are there, and you guys. I mean, blimey, you've been there. I mean, you're mostly here every week anyway. But of course, if anybody was listening and watching the marathon broadcast that Jamie did for SynthFest yesterday, which he's in the chat room, so I get the chance to say to him again, I doff my cap to you, sir, because you did an absolutely stellar job for an 8-hour continuous live stream, managing all of those guests and the clips and the videos and the dodgy audio connections and me freezing up mid-demonstration, all that kind of stuff. You superb job. So I think we can all give a virtual round of applause to Jamie there. So well done. But of course, if you are in the chat room, we really do want you to join in, particularly with this one, because it's a discussion, it's an open debate. So what we would like you to do, that if you do have any questions for us, just do @ProSynth Network to make sure that we can see that in the chat room, or you can do @Ben Simpson or @Synthient Sound, and I'm not sure if Simon's in there as well, if it's Simon66, and that's Simon with a C, he's awkward like that. But put your questions in there and make sure you do tag us so that we can see this, because they're kind of going through and we'll be talking, and so yeah, just try and get our attention that way. So let's, without further ado, let's crack on with the subject of this panel discussion, which is the future of synthesis. And we thought that this could be a good way of kind of just discussing the synthesis methods that we are privy to today, and the wonderful technologies that we have, and where do we think the next step to be? Are we going to be kind of rejuvenating old things again? Are we going to come up with some wonderful new technology, and if so, what is it? Is the technology driven maybe by the way that we interact with it through either a keyboard or a touch surface, or with fresh air or something like that? So yeah, we're going to be just looking at all of those kind of things and speculating and looking forward and looking back and just having a good old geeky chinwag, I guess, is the best way of describing it. So without further ado, let's kick this whole thing off, and let's bring everybody onto screen, and I'll probably try and keep this shot as much as we can throughout, because this is all about everyone's opinions. Simon, I'm going to start off with you because you're our special guest. The current state of synthesis methods that we have today in the year 2020. What are your opinions on that, in terms of, do you think that we've got a good balance of stuff? Do we have too much of one and not enough of the other? Do you see a gap in the market for something new to come along? What were your initial thoughts on the current state of what we have in terms of synthesis?
For me, I mean, obviously, my sort of interest is more what comes out in hardware. I mean, I love what's going on in software, and actually, in the last month or so, I've bought a lot of software. But while it's good and clever, it doesn't, for me, it doesn't bring the same excitement as a physical piece of hardware in front of you. Saying that, I think what's going on at the moment, particularly what's come out or what's been announced this month, just goes to show that I think we are rejuvenating a very exciting period. Back when I was 17, 18 years old, I worked in retail. That would have been 84, 85, which also was a very exciting part of my life and part of the technology of electronic musical instruments, because we were going from analog to digital. The world of sampling had just become affordable. And it seemed like every week there was something new that was coming out that you'd go, oh, wow, I need to get that piece of gear. Looking at what's happened this week with the Arturia, with the sequential, with just some of the Eurorack stuff that's come out. Again, I think we're really sort of lucky to be in that sort of era of, wow, yeah, there's another bit of kit that I want. In fact, we were just saying prior to going on air, it's like a domino effect. What's coming next, and how much is it going to break the bank
exactly
in the next? But no, I think there's the big difference is that now technology is such that it can be a lot more diverse in terms of it's cheaper, it's more reliable, which is the big thing compared to what it was back in the day. And I think for not just the when they're replicating things, but the new bits and pieces of kit that are coming out are really exciting.
Yeah.
With regards to the software, I was thinking about this during the week. I'm not entirely sure what I think will happen with software. We're talking, sort of synthesizer and sound generation on computers. I think there will be possibly in a few years' time, I'm thinking of maybe some sort of universal standard like ACB or ABM or something like that all the manufacturers will adopt, and it will be not as it is now, but something where they have a universal standard, and it is just like, you really cannot tell the difference type of thing. That's where I think it's going. I mean, I might be completely wrong, but yeah, I just hope it continues. I mean,
it's almost like a second golden age, isn't it?
It is. I mean, I'm not going to try and use that word second wave, because we're all sick of that saying. But it is. It's really good. I mean, and thank God we've got it, because at the moment I think we're all going through a very melancholy period of turning the news on, and this really. Yeah. In fact, yesterday I was down at my favourite music shop, which is DV. Down in Romford, DV247. Really good bunch down there. Yeah. And he was saying, sales are really, really booming. So I think that's testament to go and show what's out there. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Exciting time.
Jamie in the chat room just mentioned something here about which we can come to, either now or later. Quality assurance and finishing the firmware before releasing. The second one of which is a particularly big bugbear of mine, because I hate consumers, myself included in that, being used as a beta testing team. When you put that stuff out, it should be good. It should be ready to go, and all you should be fixing are those tiny little niggly things that you just couldn't help but miss. But a lot of the times, stuff comes out and it just feels like you've been given a beta version, and there's some significant updates that take place over the following months. Cryss, what do you think? What's your opinion on the current state of the synthesis methods and technologies that we have today?
Yeah, I mean, it's better than ever. I mean, talk about a second wave or second golden age. Like, this one is even better than the first one, and I know that we often can look back to certain golden times, the late 50s for guitars and amps, or, the early 80s for analog synthesizers, different times like that. But we have so much available to us, a far broader spectrum. I even remember beginning to play music in the early 90s. Like, what was available was not like today. So I started with a guitar, but the economical options were not very good. And so I ended up, fortunately, I was given a guitar, and then I just worked my butt off to make enough money to buy an American Strat. Well, I mean, these days, that's just not necessary in any sort of musical instrument frame. But, talking about synthesizers, back in the day when we started, whether it was 70s, 80s, 90s, whatever, some in the chat room maybe earlier than that, the options weren't good for us. And we had that interview with Mick McNeil, and he was talking about just having a Korg mono synth, and he was upset that it didn't play more than one note. And yet here, when we think about what is a synthesis, or what's available to a keyboard player for synthesizers, if you're just starting out, maybe you're young and you don't have a lot of money yet, and we have such a broad spectrum these days. We still have the super instruments, and even in my little studio here, to think what's available to me is on such a broad spectrum. I would say I have this sitting next to me, but the other day I was sitting down and I was exploring granular synthesis, and I made a fantastic sounding patch that was just a sample that I had made, and then I did all the granular stuff with it. And by the time I was done with it and just fed it through a free Valhalla Supermassive, I came out with something that sounded like it should have come off a Waldorf Quantum. But I made it on Isotope Iris 2, which I bought for like $7. So the range and the ability, there's for people who want to create music, there's no limits. And I don't think we've hit the peak yet. I think in the next few years we'll kind of hit the peak for the kind of getting back to the originals and revisiting the past. But then after that, maybe we'll start seeing start heading into new designs and future. I don't know.
No, it's I think, like you say, it's this kind of new wave. I don't know whether I necessarily agree. I'm not disagreeing as such, but I don't know if it's better now than that first kind of wave, because I lived through that first wave, and it was, as Simon pointed out, it was just like every week there was something new and different. I think we're getting to that point, but we're new and different. Back then was new and different than never been done before. Now we've got new and different, but a lot of it has kind of been done before. Yeah. So I guess for me it kind of takes the shine off. But I don't disagree that it is it's pretty spectacular what we're getting, and the use of technology.
When was the last time you heard something that actually wowed you, though, that was like, whoa? I remember the D50 when that came out.
Yeah.
It was like, whoa, what's that? That doesn't sound anything like anything I've heard before. And we don't really get that now, do we? It's kind of an improvement of how something sounded, or like an extension of a programming system. There's not been anything that you could say was outright new.
I guess it's harder for us to be impressed by stuff now, and there's some really cool stuff going on now. And I'm not disagreeing on that point at all. It's just we're harder to impress because we have seen a lot of it before, and we'll come on to the rehashing of old techniques and technologies. Ben, come to you for the end of this last bit. What are your thoughts on in terms of the state of synthesis right now as we see it?
I think that we are just getting the same things redone. Even the Hydrasynth has got it's taken the ribbon controller kind of idea and a poly aftertouch and put it with essentially a kind of wavetable kind of thing, and it is great, it is great. But wouldn't it be nice to have like a new sound generation system if possible, just to explore, to mess with, to see the possibilities, because we kind of know what something like. I've never been on a quantum, a Waldorf quantum, but I've got a good idea what it can do. It's not, even though it's very, very good, I don't think that it's going to absolutely blow me out of my shoes kind of things. And I just wonder where that's going. I think like there's been more interesting developments in modular and software than there has in standalone hardware synths for quite a while, really. Imperfect said in the chat room, if we could have the same hands-on control that we do with hardware, but the convenience of software synthesis, because there's so much that you can do, and for things to be, there's been loads of projects that I've revisited in the past, and my synths sound nothing like what they did when I originally did it. But if I load something up that I did in software, even though the overall kind of depth and tone isn't the same, it is identical to the last time I did it. So probably I'd like to see some closer integration between hardware and software, and things working seamlessly, and it kind of getting the best of both worlds there, just from that side of it.
So it's interesting you mentioned kind of the benefits of hardware and the benefits of software, because I think that manufacturers and developers have kind of been trying different things. I mean, we obviously we came through an age when everything was hardware, and then when did I buy Cubase VST? Was what, mid to late 90s when that came out. So that's kind of when the but all we had then was that VB1 bass thing, didn't we? And there was a couple of others, and that was it. And you really needed a powerful computer to run the whole thing. And we've then kind of moved, software has come in, and manufacturers are doing lots, so many more dedicated controllers for dedicated, synths or DAWs. And Edna's Disco Machine, as he's known in the chat room there, pointed out this thing, which I said we weren't going to do news topics, and I'm sticking by that, but this kind of is relevant. So this is the MP MIDI controller, which is this kind of like giant screen with a bunch of rotary controllers. I almost said knobs. Rotary controllers around each side that can then be mapped to the software, and it hosts plugins, and it runs on all major DAWs, and it can host VST2, VST3, and audio units plugins. It's an exceptional thing, and I know that it has been tried before. Obviously, the PPG Realizer was one of those things in early days, was kind of supposed to be this kind of thing, and there have been a couple of others over the years, but none have been brilliantly successful. This, on the other hand, looks pretty amazing. So maybe maybe that's the future, this kind of final merging, if that is affordable and stable. Because also, what did we have? What was that thing? It was a rack mount unit that basically had a Linux machine in there, and it was hosting
Raptor, was it?
That's it. Yeah.
Raptor. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's been done, and it's never been brilliantly successful. But who knows? That's a and of course, Open Labs, the Open Labs Miko and Nico, and there was 2 or 3 different things where it's essentially a Windows computer or a Windows laptop in a massive keyboard with loads of kind of dedicated controllers. So I mean, those sort of things have happened. Sorry, Chris.
Yeah, there's something to go along with that, though, as far as where it might head, is that we have to consider the audience, because when we see a lot of synth shows, everybody's in their 40s and 50s, and a lot of them started synthesizers in the time of synth pop in the early 80s and hardware. And when you kind of step into some of the other genres, you see a lot younger players, and they don't have the same background with hardware. Mm-hmm. And so, thinking about companies, the economic issue of it is, as those guys become a bigger share of the market, as the older guys that grew up with Mini Moogs and Profits and whatever get older, they're going to become a larger market share. And so I would expect that we would see companies finding ways to serve that market better. And so these devices that you just mentioned would be would pretty much head in that direction, like getting the most out of having a tactile interface, yet having the power of some of these soft synths that are just incredibly versatile.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's kind of like the current state of play. I think we can all agree that it's a pretty good time to be alive if you are into your synthesizers, be it software or hardware. There's new, very interesting, very exciting stuff coming along. So to move on to the next kind of talking point, synthesis methods. I mean, we've got a whole bunch. So we have analog subtractive, we have additive, we have FM, we have sampling, we have wavetable, and there are probably a few more that we can pile into that there.
Granular.
So and variations. You can take, say, sampling and divide it down into other kind of subsets of that. So I'm going to kick this one off with how I felt in the 90s, when, having been used to digital synthesis and analog synthesis, all of a sudden we have modeling. And I'm not just talking about virtual analog, I'm talking about physical modeling, synthesizers that could create natural acoustic sounds incredibly realistically without the use of samples, and being blown away by this wonderful new technology that had a whole different way of working to everything else. And then you thought back 10 years or so, we had that dawn of FM and then digital synthesis, and a few years before that we had the dawn of sampling. And it's one of those things, and I don't want to put any pictures in anybody's heads, but when you sat down contemplating on the throne of a morning and you think, I wonder what synthesis methods might come up in the future, and I cannot for the life of me think of what the next thing is, because if I could, I wouldn't be here. I'd be a millionaire. I'd be investing in that technology and developing, but I can't see where the next thing is coming from and what that next thing can be.
I think that there's a lot of work going on in like taking physical modeling to the next stage. I've been doing a little bit of research on stuff, and I've got to admit I got a little bit out of my depth, like reading these scientific papers on where you can go on physical modeling, and it was like, oh, just through it. But it does seem as though that the potential of physical modeling was almost realized, but not totally. So we've got these like lush sample libraries from Spitfire and others, but imagine if a synth could actually generate that to that realism, and it's not based on samples, so the expression is limitless. With sampling, you can multi-sample, you can round robin, you can do all this, but it's still, you've got these to choose from.
It's restricted.
And how you play is going to select one of them. But what about like a poly aftertouch keyboard with other expressive methods in there, and what you were playing wasn't a preset amount of choices, but an unlimited amount of expression, like just like the real thing. And I think that might be the next big thing for me, from what I've read, is that physical modeling will go a whole leap above where it was last time, and will realistically, absolutely indistinguishably emulate acoustic sounds and synthesized sounds as well, because if you're modeling things, there's no limit, is there, really?
I mean, it does seem to be one of those technologies that kind of all of a sudden appeared, and there was this big, we had Korg with the Prophecy and the Z1, we had Yamaha with the VP1, although only about 3 of those exist. Actually, there's probably a few more, but there's the VL1, the VL7 and the VL70, and there were a few other acoustic modeling, and I want to make that clear definition, not virtual analog modeling like AM1Xs and JP8000s back then, but acoustic modeling. I think Technics did the WSA1, which had a form of, it was kind of a mixture of sampling and modeling, and it's one of those synths that I almost bought at a stupid price and then never did, and have regretted it ever since. Ever since. I'm making these puns up.
Slip.
But it does seem that it all of a sudden it just disappeared, and I wonder a lot. I think a lot of that was down to sampling, because it was cheaper and becoming easier to do, and we could have big amounts of samples on a hard drive, and memory was getting cheaper and all that. And obviously physical modeling was quite limited. There was polyphony. The VP1 was polyphonic, the Z1 was polyphonic, but that's kind of about it. And it almost like, it was just like the brakes hit, and then it kind of went away, and everybody just went, oh, we'll model analog, and we'll carry on using samples for acoustic instruments, and that's kind of where it sat. And I know that every now and again a company comes along and says, oh, look, we've got some wonderful string models here, and for example, Reason have just released a string modeled instrument called Friction, which sounds really, really good. But I think there's a lot of IP related issues there, because it's still protected under some patent here or there. So yeah, it just seems weird that it kind of stopped and then never got further explored from there. And I think you're right. I think hopefully it will get re-explored further down the line. Simon, do you...
there's that push and pull though, between technology and usefulness, and we see that happening right now with Roland, and so for this really complex physical modeling, for realistic spaces with reverbs, for the accuracy of the virtual analog stuff, like it takes a lot of power, and at some point, like you start heading as a company in the direction of, look, we're getting closer and closer and more accurate, but then it becomes cost prohibitive and feature prohibitive because it takes so much processing power. And so then you have companies kind of back and go, okay, now our next marketing thing is like, now we've got lots of polyphony, and now you can use this on so many devices. And so like we're seeing that with the ACB versus Zen stuff in Roland. And so they're kind of, it's that kind of push and pull, like we got to go in this direction for a little while, then we'll push in this one again. As when the processing power catches back up, we'll take the features of this and put it into the better sounding stuff. But there's always that kind of, things, though, that stuff going back and forth. And, back to the first point of why this era is better, it's precisely because things are getting better. There's nothing new under the sun. Everything is just waveforms still, whether it's analog or digital. But we're putting in our hands so much more than we used to have, and it's that marriage of technology. And because there's a whole ton of analog components in here, and an all analog signal path. But we've got some computer brains that are absolutely astounding controlling it all. So I would think that as time goes on, we see that kind of happening in those moments where, the moment that you were complaining about, that I would complain about also, is when all of a sudden a company goes back to like, well, let's do something that's safer or that's easier or that will, give us more polyphony. And I'm like, no, I'd rather have less polyphony but better sound. But everybody's got a different place where they break on that. Other people would be, hey, I just need it to work, and I want to use it on this device and this device and this device. It doesn't matter if it's the most accurate or not. And I guess that's why maybe they're kind of bouncing on different parts of the market.
Yeah. Simon, what are your thoughts in terms of, technologies that have been lightly touched upon or skirted around or not even fully explored, and could they potentially, provide the future of synthesis?
I'll just actually, listening, first of all, what Ben was saying about the way that we're always searching for the better quality, the best quality sounds, and, how we're always searching for the perfect real string sound, the perfect acoustic instrument. Yet we are excited about things like the Polybrook. We're excited about when Cryss or Jamie comes up with that swell patch on an analog synth. Well, that's not replicating anything other than an analog synth. So here we are, half of us. And I'm absolutely on board with this, because just thinking about what now gives me a buzz. When I play a piece of software that's got this wonderful pad sound on it, well, that's not it's not emulating anything real, and it's like me going back to what I've heard, in the last 40 odd years. But I still do want the perfect modelling. So it's kind of, yes, we want what we're talking about now, but we still have, there's a part of us that will always go back to the old stuff. When you think about it, Rob, when back in the 80s, mid 80s, everything was best quality sampling. Things like a Mini Moog or a Korg Monopoly, no one wanted. It was the thing to have was a workstation. That's why, when the M1 came out, everyone wanted an M1, and all the analog stuff got thrown onto the scrap pile.
Yeah.
But we still want part of the stuff we had back in the past, and we still are looking for the best of the future. What no one has done yet is put everything in one big box.
Yeah.
Is that what we're searching for?
Yeah, that's true. Know. Sasquatch actually said in the chat room, he said, is the future of synthesis the merging of analog and digital, and I guess other forms of synthesis, without people getting hung up on whether it's analog or digital? Because we still have this debate today that, and this is one of my biggest bugbears, is that every synthesizer that comes out pretty much is judged against an unwritten standard of analog subtractive synthesis. That apparently has been, and I don't know who, it's been made the benchmark that everything is judged against. Oh, well, that's no this, that, or that analog synth. It's something else. Digital can't do what analog. Of course it can if you program it right. We look at the digital synths that we've got today that have been released in the last 12, 24 months. Hydrasynth, Argon 8. Those are making incredible sounds. Quantum, Peak, Summit, all digital synthesizers, albeit some of them have got analog bits here and there, but they're all digital synthesizers, and they're all being judged against analog subtractive synthesis as if that was the benchmark. And it frustrates the hell out of me, being an FM nut and a digital nut, that's why is that the benchmark? And can we not just get past whether it's digital or analog? Can it do what I want it? Can it sound, the way I want it to sound? Can it do all those crazy things?
I think the other thing you got to remember is if, as Ben was saying earlier on, if there is a future element of synthesis that we haven't yet discovered yet, you've got to make it so that everyone can understand it. That was the problem with FM.
Yes,
it was a brilliant idea, and John Chowning, was way ahead of his time. But the problem is that realistically, Rob, no one really understood it.
No,
and I think
still don't.
Yeah, and I think now with things like your Hydrasynths, your Polybrew, things that come out, everyone who buys them has to have an element of, well, I understand the basic principles about it, or if not, I've got a good sort of idea of how I can possibly either read about it or just fathom it out by pushing them and trial and error. And I think that's the danger of if we go and someone invents a new synthesis that is technically way advanced in all aspects. Yes, it will give us the end product that we're looking for, but what about the UI?
Yeah.
And actually Wagyu, he made a very good point. Are we looking for a big LCD screen with magnetic switches and buttons that we can put on the screen? I mean, I know he's obviously joking, but the problem is that it's a very valid point. Whatever you come up with, you've got to come up with a UI that is understandable and people can use it. Otherwise, we're going to go for FM2, and it's just not going to take off.
Well,
kind of related to that would be, so the UI is a very important thing, and we've seen some synthesizers that have done a really good job. I mean, I'm not haven't spent that much time with a Quantum. But a touchscreen, the Hydrasynth and the Moog One have incredible UIs that make it easy. Of course, a lot of this stuff is virtual analog. But when we were talking about what's the next big type of synthesis, I don't think that's where the industry has been right now as much. I mean, people are messing with granular and things like that, but it's not new really. And where we have seen innovation happening is actually in the physical interface of controlling your synthesizers. And it kind of got me thinking about this as Robbie was talking about analog versus digital, because one of the big kind of divides in synthesis, although one of them being a lot bigger these days, would be East Coast versus West Coast and how you interact with a synthesizer. And I think about some of those early experimenters who didn't use keyboards to control synthesizers and how popular that is today. And it's probably, living on in the legacy of modular. But where we have seen kind of innovations is, where that's new, I have not seen that before, is in terms of controllers. And so we've had the, this whatever 17th century, or I don't know when harpsichords came out, somebody in the chat probably knows, but we've had this interface for hundreds of years. And now we're beginning to see a few different interfaces. And of course, in the early days of synthesis, there were different interfaces, but now we're kind of coming back to that. So, the instrument or the Syncel Morph, or even like that Brian Eno app that's on the phone where it's colors and you touch different areas and it creates sounds, and using graphical interfaces, shapes and color to interact with what was that other one, the Polygogo or something? It was a module that had like a different kind of graphical interface that you interacted with it. I think that's going to be, although that one had a very traditional knobs and sliders, as I recall, but the interface has been the thing that has been moving forward these days, and the keyboard still reigns supreme, but we're seeing a lot more adopters of other styles of interfaces.
Yeah.
What about like augmented reality? Do you think that anything like that would ever have a use in synthesis? Like, imagine if you could. I know I'm going a little bit sci-fi, and I apologise, but you know, if there was some way you could actually physically get hold of
Iron Man, like he does on Iron Man.
Yeah. I mean, we're very close to being able to do that.
Well,
imagine the Fairlight thing, but like
it has been
physically
done.
Getting hold of it.
Because I remember at SynthFest in 2016, I think it was the first one, where the DeepMind had just launched. So that would be right, wouldn't it? 2016, DeepMind. Yeah. So the guys from Midas, who were the guys that kind of came up with that, brought it along to the show, and everybody was like, this was Behringer's first synthesizer per se, and they got these goggles, and it was like a VR headset, but it was augmented reality, and so it was still in a very prototype stage, but you could, with the glove things on, you could manipulate oscillators and filters. It was quite limited, but you could do something. And the crowd of people that was around that stand pretty much all day, everyone wanting to have a go, and they'd got a TV screen with some sort of representation of what the guy with the headset on was looking at. It seemed quite interesting, but it never came to anything. We've never seen anything. And there was another thing, wasn't there, that it was something you could sit on just below your monitor that sent out, whether it was infrared or whatever, some kind of disruptible beam that you could use, not kind of theremin-like, but it was almost like Minority Report, where you could move things around on your screen just by waving your hand in front of it. And of course that would have not only musical benefits, but benefits in using your DAW. So that kind of thing has been around, but it hasn't adopted.
Yeah, I think this virtual projection thing, go back to the sort of Iron Man type of thing, is probably the closest to what we really are looking for, because we do need an element of physical interaction with it. Go back to the first touchscreens. I mean, I'm trying to think, the first touchscreen I had on the synth was probably the Jupiter 8, and it was shocking. But now, when you look at what we've got now on the Quantum and the Iridium and that, they're getting really good. And I think again, when technology catches up with our needs and our expectations, so that what we're seeing on TV becomes a reality, I think then it'll open up into a completely new. And you got to remember that technology now is so much cheaper.
Yes.
Back in the 80s. RAM was just like, well, we can't make it because RAM is expensive, and that's why you're paying £1 million for something that can sample for 2 seconds and be happy with that. That's the future. And
there's two factors with the technology, as I'd see how well it's implemented, which is usually a problem early on, in that maybe there's not enough processing power. We're kind of coming to the age where that's not a problem anymore. And the other thing is, what are people used to? Because we've had some kind of experiments in technology that didn't go well at first, but then later on, 10 years later, they just were getting the hang of it and doing it better. Other experiments just never worked out, even though technologically maybe it was interesting. And so the one I was thinking of, Aaron also was thinking too, which was the DBeam. So here we're talking about manipulating physical space for parameters, and Roland did that with the DBeam, but it's the laughing stock of synth shows. Everybody makes fun of it, but it is. You can see how it was an interesting, forward-looking idea that people just didn't accept. And to my knowledge, it wasn't because it didn't work, but it was just something that was new. It's like, I want my mod wheel or whatever.
Yeah.
I reckon if they'd have put lights coming out of that, it would have been a lot more successful.
I was going to say the same thing. The problem with the DBeam,
make it look like a laser harp.
Yeah, but the problem, you're right. the problem with the DBeam was when you put your hand over it, you didn't know where it was. You didn't know what part of, was it modulation and pitch you could put on it. I think, again, Ben, you're absolutely right. If you sort of have a light there and you knew where you were, but that's all down to technology, isn't it? It's like originally Jean-Michel Jarre's laser harp, although that was, well, as far as I was told, it wasn't actually connected to anything, and he was miming. But the idea of it is brilliant because, you can see what you're doing type of thing. Nowadays, well, it's only a matter of time, I think, before all this becomes a reality. I think even if it's hardware in form, the software inside it is going to be dependent on how quickly technology progresses. And I think we've seen it's going at a rapid old rate there, really. So
let's move this into another point that we'd got down, which was is synthesis driven by the interaction method? So do we come up with new ideas for synthesis because we want to play an instrument in a different way? As Cryss pointed out, the traditional piano style keyboard has been around for centuries. It clearly works, and people are clearly, they think it's good and good enough. But there are other ways of doing it. You've got your Buchla style interactive surfaces. We have touchscreen surfaces now that allow us to play in either completely different ways or advanced ways. So I'm thinking the Animoog iPad app, where it has that kind of piano layout, but by touching the screen and then moving your finger around the screen, you're affecting all sorts of different parameters, and that was really, I found that to be really expressive. Ribbon controllers is another one. VR is another one. And I'm going to put this out in the chat room because I want somebody to remind me what it's called. A couple of years ago, there was this thing that was buzzing around online. It was almost like a table which had a large touch screen in it, and you could sample a sound into it, and it was almost like a giant Etch-a-Sketch, and you could and I'm trying to remember what the name of that thing was, and I can't find it. But if somebody in the chat room, your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to find me the name of that thing, and I'll bring it up, because I thought as far as sampling goes, it wasn't bringing anything necessarily new to sampling. It was bringing a new way of interacting with it, which then could have opened up a load of possibilities. No, it wasn't. Native ES says it was the React table. No, that wasn't. Although again, there is another great example of a new way of doing things. These blocks with all the different parameters on it. You put them on the table, and then you can move them, and they do wonderful things. And there was an iPad app, I think, for that as well, where you could mess around with that. So what I'm trying to get at here is, does the interaction method demand a form of synthesis that goes with it? Can that be the driver for a new form of synthesis? And again, this surge of popularity that has been going for some while now in modular and Eurorack, where the interaction is not necessarily through a keyboard, it's through arpeggiators and sequencers, and then plugging in cables and messing around in that sense. So that's different, and that, I guess, that's driven Eurorack. People like to play instruments by using those methods. So Ben, what do you think? Does new synthesis require new interaction methods? Are they inextricably linked, or what? What do you think?
I think the keyboard is proven to be, for me anyway, the best way of interacting with a synthesizer. It just feels right. But I think developments on the keyboard, like the Rolly stuff and that, was it Osmosis? Was it?
Yeah.
Osmos. Osmos. They're like really good advancements on the basic keyboard, and I think that's where it should go. Like that little Microfreak thing's got as well. That's got those sensors on it, hasn't it? Yeah. So I like that. I like the idea of a keyboard being more expressive. But I think the driving force for electronic instruments, synthesizers, shouldn't necessarily be the interface, but that could bring a new element to it. It could be a new avenue for inspiration, the way that you interact with it. But the driving force has got to be the movement that comes from it, because I think like when big sound technologies have been released in the past, they've kind of transformed music a little bit, and there's anything that's been like that. Like when the electric guitar came out, it transformed music. When the Moog mono synths came out, and then the cheaper Japanese ones, you had this influx of bands all using that technology for the first time. When the TR 808 got rediscovered, and the 303 that got used in a different way, for me, there's nothing that's going to do that. There's nothing that's going to launch a new style of music. We need something that's going to come along and make people think, oh, how can I use that? And actually new genres are born from it. That's what I'd like to see anyway. I think the interface, I agree with what Simon and, well, all of you have said, really. It is essential that it is familiar and we can use it, but the input, the input style is fine for me as a keyboard, really. I don't want that to change.
I don't think in our lifetime we'll see it, but I think the only way it could possibly change from physical black and white keys would be some sort of thought, where you put I don't know, like a little helmet on, you've got a neurological sort of link between you, and you can just think that'd be brilliant for me, because I can't play for shit. But that's my wishful thinking.
What are they called? Neuralink or something? It's another Elon Musk thing. That's got ways of communicating out your head into technology. So maybe we'll just be able to switch into Rick Wakeman mode and
exactly.
And off we go. Yeah.
I think
that's what I was thinking.
Music is it's a human thing. Well, not exclusively, but it's certainly it involves a level of interaction, whether it's playing a keyboard, bowing a string, plucking a string, smacking a dead animal skin or something, whatever. There's always a level of physical interaction, and you feel the music as you play the music, and whether you're blowing into something or hitting something or plucking or whatever. Whilst I don't disagree that thought control could or would possibly be a thing, I'm not entirely sure how many people would go for that, because to just kind of like sit there and think it. I don't know, because can you imagine going to a gig of artists that use thought to make their music? They just stand there, and all this music comes out.
No. I was actually more thinking on a selfish my line, because I can sit here and think, sort of hum a bass line and think, oh, okay, well, though I'm thinking it and these keys are lighting up in front of me or whatever, and then I totally agree. There'll always be a live element to it. It's not going to be in our lifetime anyway. I'm fairly convinced of that. So for me anyway.
Edna's Disco Machine in the chat room, my good friend Graham, has reminded me of what this thing is. The Kaleidoscope, spelt COLLIDO scope, and this was this desk, if you will. Let me just bring up the topic screen here, and go over here, and it's this thing. I'm sure we all remember this. I won't play too much. It's just kind of this table with two very long screens on, and then two small mini keyboards. And rotary knobs where you can just move the start and end of the loop points. And it's kind of a granular thing, and there's touch surfaces, and it just seemed like a really cool way of using sampling. And there's still a web page for it, and they're still, I think, looking into making it, but it's kind of disappeared off the face of the planet, that one.
Go ahead. Continue the topic of will controllers drive new type of synthesis, and I would say the answer is no. What controllers and new types of controllers will drive is new types of music, but not new types of synthesis, because you still have to control something. And something that Bert said earlier in the chat, he said the future of future of synths is guitar, and in a humorous way. But when we think about it. So when we're using these new types of controllers, whatever they are, even if it's like the Buchla Thunderbird, or it's a Sinsel, or whatever it is, a Raleigh, it all has to control something. There has to be some sort of synthesis, some sort of modulation, and often what we're seeing that they're attempting to do with these controllers is get closer to the feel of playing an acoustic instrument. Now, I'm not talking about a particular acoustic instrument like a cello or something. I'm just saying that in general, we're trying to get to that kind of interaction with music, because when you play guitar, you play a cello, you have a certain ability to control the timbre of the sound by the fine movements of your hand. Now, the four of us can sit down at an old Jupiter or something, and we can press the key and it's all going to sound exactly the same. It doesn't matter how I hit it or what my hands look like, it's going to sound the same. But you get two people on the same guitar rig and they can sound totally different playing the same chord, because of how much the interaction with the instrument affects the sound of it. And so when we think about these controls, I think everybody's trying to get closer to the feel of playing an acoustic instrument, where the nuances between each of us playing that one patch, it'll still sound like us. Whereas that's been a little bit harder to do with keyboard-driven synthesizers versus other types of instruments, where you think of, Eddie Van Halen and Brian Setzer playing the same rig sound totally different. Yeah. But they could play the exact same rig, a Marshall and a Strat or something, whatever it is, and have such a different feeling to it. And so, but then when we think about, controllers are trying to achieve that symbiosis between player and instrument and be able to fully realize all of that expression, but we still have to have something that is being expressed. And so I think that's where we're seeing things like Newfangled Audios generate, where it's still synthesis, and in some ways it's a different form of it, because we're seeing a little bit more of a West Coast style synthesizer, but yet when you're making sounds with it, it's a little more like an East Coast style synthesizer. And then you have the oscillator, which is the pendulum technology. And so here's somebody that's thought, where can we go next? I don't see anything on the horizon, but looking at mathematical models of the physics of a pendulum, of a multi-arm pendulum, how can you make that musical in the waveforms that it produces into something that's interesting? And it took Dan Gillespie quite a while to do that. I think he thought he was going to be like 4 months, and it ended up being 2 years to create that synthesizer. So there could be, Generate to me represents kind of the most forward-thinking, or some of the most forward-thinking ideas about synthesis right now. But when we still consider it, there's very traditional elements of both East and West Coast synthesis in it. You can play it with the keyboard, or you can play it with an instrument or anything else. But there's always, again, I think the controller and the aspect of the more control that you have is going to be more about replicating that experience of the acoustic instrument.
Yeah. So kind of following on from that then, one thing that, again, a bit like the DBeam, has never caught on, because kind of people went ha ha at them when they saw people using them, and that was breath controllers or wind controllers. So we've got wind controller instruments like the Akai EWIs and the Yamaha WXs, and there are a few others out there. But there are also these little things that you could just put in your mouth and that would deliver some kind of breath realism to synthesis, and whether that was through physical modelling or whether that was through other forms as well, it never really became a thing. And I was always surprised by that, because if you were a good keyboard player, this surely would have added a string to your bow to be able to express through breath, or was that just doing too many things? I don't know. It always kind of baffled me why that never really kind of took off outside of the dedicated wind controller, things that were trying to be saxophones or clarinets. Any thoughts on breath control, wind control?
I'd like to think that MPE and just technology on keyboards is just a lot easier than sticking something in your mouth and pretending you're James Galway. Really, I mean, I can't remember where I saw it now, but there was a guy, I saw it on YouTube, where he was not only pressing the key down, but he was moving his finger from the front of the keyboard to the back, and it was changing like the filter, and it was changing, and you could assign it. I can't remember what that was, but I honestly thought, oh, that's a really good idea. It was all related to MPE and that, but the early breath controllers, I thought, were crap.
I've got a couple of...
looked like you had a big dummy in your mouth,
yeah,
or anything else, wasn't it? But they just didn't work that well.
No, I've got a couple of BC ones, and there's a little like a little screw in the base which you can tighten or loosen, and
right.
So you have to blow harder or softer, so you can slacken it off or tighten it up, and I can see, when I'm doing this, but all I hear when I'm playing this is the whistle of the air going through the controller, and it just completely spoils the experience. So I have to put headphones on, but I can still do it. But when it works and you get the right patch and you're blowing and playing on the keyboard, it's quite effective. I don't know. I mean, I've seen people play EWIs, Akai's EWI instruments. And again, with the right patches, it sounds incredible in the expression that they have, because it's not just about breath in those things, but it's also about, with a reed instrument, it's the pressure you put on the reed with the lips as well, and it can sense those sorts of things. So that's always very cool. But it's always kind of intrigued me why that never really took off. Maybe
yeah.
I was just going to say, like with the wind controller, it's in your hands and you lift it up to your mouth to play it. Like if you're in the middle of playing something live and you've got to take one hand off to grab the breath controller, and then you've got a bit of backing vocals that you've got to join in on or whatever, it's not the most practical of devices, I think, because it goes in your mouth.
And it's, you've got to clean it, and the spit everywhere and stuff. It's not very glamorous, I suppose. Watching Jamie's show yesterday, he was talking to a young lady called Lena, who has got this. Again, I wasn't paying too much attention, but she has a microphone that when she puts, sings into it or speaks into it, it converts that to MIDI data, and then can be used to trigger and what have you. So that's another kind of way of doing it. There's lots of ways. And MPE is going to broaden that, I suppose.
I mean, don't forget the original breath controller, Rob. We're talking 35 years ago. So, and you're right, they haven't really pursued it. So maybe as you've said, maybe there will be someone that comes out with something with a little bit more sort of modern adaptation to it that works really well.
I think the market is probably hindered the work on these type of devices because they could probably be a lot more advanced than they are, but there's just not enough market to make it very profitable. One of the other big thing besides wind controllers would have been some sort of guitar controller, and I know there was some stuff in the 80s for it, but the things that I have tried out more recently, because I'm so much better at guitar than I am at playing keys, that my dream would be that I could play some stuff mainly while I'm composing, is to do it on the guitar, where I can translate it from my brain to fingers to the recording much quicker than I can, and I sit and I figure it out and I practice it till I can play it well enough. But one of the problems has been there's just been nothing that's good enough. I had, at least up till a few years ago, what was the best one at the time, which was the Fishman Triple Play, which was a pickup that would slide in next to your bridge on your guitar, It was a hexaphonic pickup, had a device that would send it out, and this particular one was even Bluetooth, so you could do it wirelessly, and then you can control whatever software, synthesizer, or hardware that you possess. But there was something about it, like, I mean, you had to, because it's trying to translate the acoustic vibrations off of strings, and you're trying to figure out how, like, to handle string bends or slides. And also the accuracy of the tracking has always been a problem. And so then there's been some other attempts of this. Like there was one called the, I think it was the Jam Stick, if I recall, that was roughly a guitar-looking type thing, but in two sections. And it had whatever plastic strings or something. But you would press on the neck part of it to play note. And then you would pick with the other hand, but it was detached. And so it was meant for guitar players, but didn't feel at all like a guitar. And so, you know, that was a failure. I think the ones like the Fishman have been a little bit better, and that it is done on an actual guitar. You can put it on your favorite guitar. But then again, the problems are like controlling it and its accuracy, because when I hear people playing and trying to shred on those things, it just doesn't sound like somebody playing a synthesizer. It's not as clean. It's kind of weird and wobbly. And it just hasn't worked as well. The best results that I had was controlling, Rompler type stuff. So like composing horn lines and things like that. I was able to whip those out in compositions really quick because I could hear the notes in my head and I could just play them rather than figuring them out on the keyboard.
Yeah.
But then again, when you think about it, like when we think of synthesizers just as a broad category, their primary market is keyboard players. You know, as a controller market, it's keyboard players, not horn players and guitar players. They could get a ton more people into that market. All of a sudden, you could have guitarists and horn players buying Omnisphere or whatever if they could perfect that technology, so you don't have to learn a whole nother instrument to be able to do it. Yeah. That would really open things up a lot.
So, Ken made a very good point in the chat room and said, let's not forget that MIDI 2.0 is just around the corner, and it really is, and that kind of implementation of that standard with the massive granularity that provides over and above what we currently have in the MIDI standard. I'm sure that's going to have some effect on the kinds of controllers that we're going to get and the kinds of synthesizers that will respond to those controllers. So we're probably going to see more of those things that we've not seen a lot of, purely because MIDI is now capable of delivering, those levels of detail and accuracy.
Apart from the Hydrasynth, I don't know. I'm probably wrong about this, but I don't know any other manufacturers that have actually implemented MPE or 2.0 yet. I don't know what the Arturia will do, but until they actually use what's available out there, because MPE actually, the fundamental basics of it is very exciting, but until they actually come up with the hardware that we can use, there's no point having it, really.
It feels very much like MIDI did in the early 80s, because 82 announcement, MIDI, all these things will be able to talk to each other.
Yeah, what's that?
Yeah, but it took it took 2 or 3 years for everybody to eventually kind of coalesce around a standard. Certain bits of equipment implemented it fully, certain bits of equipment didn't, and there was Yamaha were rushing out synthesizers in 83 that didn't have the full velocity range. And so, there's. I think we're probably seeing that we've got some manufacturers saying, we're going to go all out, and our instruments are MPE ready, MIDI 2.0 ready, and we'll get to a point where everything will settle down and everybody can say, right, now we can fully implement it because everyone agrees as to to what it should do.
Yeah, I think I can't read his name. It's Steve Elbows. Mm-hmm. He's just he's hit something I was going to say. Is the implementation of 2.0 done and dusted? No, I don't think it is.
No,
because talking of Omsphere, Eric, whatever his name is, that runs Spectrasonics, Percy, that's it. Yeah, he was saying that the concept is great and everyone's done, they put in their thoughts behind it, but as yet, and they've kind of said yes, this is what we want, but it's no one's actually come out with it and said, right, this is fully MIDI 2.0 implemented, and it's until it's ready,
Yeah, and one of the problems with controllers is that sometimes they've been exorbitantly expensive. So I've seen some really great, very fancy controllers for controlling like Yuhi Repro 1, and the controller costs almost as much as the Behringer Pro 1, and you're talking about a whole analog synthesizer. So like, why do I want to buy a hardware controller that costs almost as much as the thing that I'm trying to emulate?
Yeah.
It's kind of like that rubber keyboard, that I forget the name of that.
The Roly Seaboard.
Roly.
Yeah. I'm in two minds whether I like that or not. It just feels a bit odd to me, but
I used to have a gel wrist rest that felt like it was like one of those mouse wrist rests to stop you from getting RSI or something, and it has that kind of. I touched one. I think it might have been at SynthFest, and I just no. But then I'm not naturally a keyboard player, he says, but I just didn't feel right.
Well, and I think that's where like the Keith McMillan, whatever it was called, the keyboard or something like that, it went in a slightly more traditional direction and its feel, although it's still rubbery. And then you have the Expressive E, the Osmos, that went much more traditional while having the MPE ability that the Roly has. So there is quite of a range of what you can get if you're looking for that kind of control where you can wiggle stuff side by side or slide up and down, or and then of course velocity and aftertouch.
One thing I really like about the Roly ones is that you can like slide up the keys, and then there's like a ribbon section at the back of the keys, and you say like you're on an E. And not a tablet. I mean, like you're on an E note, and you want to slide down to like a low G or something. Yeah. That's easily done because you can physically see where it is. And I thought that the Hydra synth would be like that, but I've found myself in all kinds of troubled waters, sliding about on that ribbon controller and not quite hitting the right pitch.
It wasn't me, it was the controller. So I think so the nature of the control or surface or the interaction method of an instrument can or cannot sometimes define or be defined by a particular type of synthesis. And I think we can all agree that once MIDI 2.0 settles down and is fully specified, that we might see a whole bunch of new things, because I'm sure there are developers out there who've got crazy ideas about, hey, I've got this brilliant synthesis method, but right now there isn't any kind of technology that would allow that level of expression. Some developers go for it, and some don't, and I'm sure that once things settle down we'll probably see a push in that direction. So to kind of move on, take us a little bit off on a tangent, one of the things that often gets discussed is sampling, and how so prevalent that it's become, that it's almost stifled the development of other synthesis methods, because you can pretty much do sampling. You just put a sound into it and then do something with it, and we see hugely detailed, expansive sample libraries, and maybe those things killed off acoustic modelling synthesis because it's easier and simpler to do, and probably cheaper, and you got more polyphony, and so on and so forth. So my question to you guys is: do you think that sampling as a form of synthesis has stifled the creativity of other synthesis methods? Do you think it's kind of held things back, maybe?
No, not at all. I don't.
No. Nice
short
answer there.
because it's like it's like a tennis court. You got a net in between both sides, Rob. You know, sampling is totally different to analog synthesis. I think now in particular, because you wouldn't, again, back in the 80s when all the manufacturers came out with analog synthesizers, all they wanted to do was emulate the perfect trumpet, try and get the perfect piano, try and get whatever. I mean, you've only got to look on the presets of these old synths going through the manuals. They're all trying to emulate harp, trombone, and they were crap. So I think now what we've done is we've realized, look, if you want something that sounds acoustically correct, realistic, you're going to go for something like a sample or sample generated. If you want something like a big warm pad, you're not going to go to a sample. You're going to go back to an analog synth, surely. Yeah. So I think there's two sides to it. So no, I don't think that if sampling has stopped, because if you look, we've done the sampling thing, but a lot of the manufacturers, if not all of them, have touched on going back to analog synthesis. I mean, that's we've been on this program, you know, maybe a year or so ago, and asked the question: has the bubble burst with analog synthesis? Well, no. It's just we've just proven that.
Yeah, very true. I mean, what kind of spurred me into that was, you know, when and yeah, so you can knock this one off on the bingo card. By the way, there is a bingo card. Native VS in the chat room has created a bingo card. If you look in the description of this video down below, there's a link to it. I've put the link in there so you can mark these off and have a game of bingo while you're watching us, and you can do that every week. But when Peter Vogel came up with the concept of sampling with, you know, the Fairlight, he had for a number of years before, and along with Tony Furs, had been striving to create a form of synthesis that could replicate acoustic instruments. Because let's be honest, every synthesizer manufacturer in the 1970s was producing a synthesizer, and when they had presets on them, and those presets were brass, oboe, trombone, violin, piano, and they sounded nothing like that. But that was as close as they could get. And even if they didn't have presets, they probably had patch sheets that that were supplied in the back of the manual, how to create a brass type sound. Everyone's been trying to do that kind of thing. So he and others were trying to create a form of synthesis using additive and all of those different harmonics, because they felt that was the way to go to get, you know, acoustic sounds through an electronic synthesizer. And we kind of got there, I guess, with FM to a certain degree. You know, it was able to do a lot more authentic acoustic type sounds. But Peter Vogel says that, you know, he came up with this concept of digital sampling. He said, well, we're just going to cheat and we'll record the sound. And then all of a sudden you think, well, all these people that have been trying to create something new in synthesis think, oh, well, actually, I can just record it. You know, if I want to play, you know, if I want to make an instrument that sounds like X, I'll go and record X and then just play it back as a sample. And that's what kind of motivated that input there. Cryss, do you think that sampling in any way has stifled the development of different synthesis methods?
You're on mute.
Oh, you're on mute. Drink.
I think it has. The thing is, I think more recently we've seen sampling trying to get out of the kind of the Rompler box, and so, you know, that's been through mainly through granular as far as I've seen. And, you know, think about one of the most we think about modular and specifically Eurorack. I mean, Eurorack has all sorts of synth technology in it, analog, digital. But one of the most popular modules that has ever been is probably, it's got to be up there. Maybe after Maths would be Mutable Instruments Clouds, and that's been a huge thing. Not that people are largely using it to its full capability, but with the granular, at least we're beginning to do something, and something that I've realized in the last couple of weeks. So going back, we had talked a bit about sampling when the new version of Logic came out, and they revised the sampler. And sampling's not something that I've ever been into or been interested in, really. Have a respect for those that do, and it seems like it just takes a lot of time to do it really well, and I admire those that do. But as I was thinking about that, about sampling in general, like, what is the thing about sampling that I could really enjoy that I know it's capable of, but what was something that I would appreciate about it? And so my avenue into it has really more been granular synthesis, and that's just been recently. And so that's like I was told you, I've been thinking about, well, what kind of granular synthesizer would I want to use? And I've been doing research. And then the thing that we don't want to find out when we do that is that we own several synthesizers that already do that really well that people recommend. And you get a little bit upset because you don't get to buy something new. So I bought an $8 synthesizer.
Yeah.
And I figured out, I already have Pigments 2 and I have Omnisphere. So let me go and look at those and see what I can do with the things that I already have. And so that's what I've been doing. And it's been a fun thing because, this all comes down to waveforms, and sampling is just sampling some other waveform that's already been generated by tapping a bottle or whatever it is. So what else can you do with it? Well, we're sampling what already exists. So what if we kind of mingle it about? If we switch directions, if we figure out how big the grain slices are and how they play and all that kind of stuff, where they sit in the stereo field. And so it's not really like a new thing, but at least it's something new and interesting. But I do think just in, going just back to the industry of making synthesizers, I imagine that it really stifled a lot of creativity because you had some really cool stuff like the D50 or the Wave Station, coming out that were doing interesting and kind of combining things. And then it seemed like all of a sudden it's just all samplers, all romplers that are out. And so if you can make a ton of money on, making some sort of M1 or Triton or whatever, why bother spending a lot of time to perfect anything else or bring anything else new to market?
Yeah, that's a good point. Ben, what do you think about sampling and its impact?
I think I'm a fan of sampling. I'm surprised that it hasn't had a bigger resurgence really with modular gear and that. Seeing as you can't really store any sounds that you make, it'd be nice to sample them and have libraries of sounds that you've patched up and got something wonderful, and just sample that off and store it on a SD card or whatever for later use. But also, when the samplers first came out, like things like the emulator and that, what people really liked about them was their analog filters. Yeah. And I'm surprised that nobody's. I know Dave Smith did it with the Prophet X. Yeah. And not many people are that into the Prophet X. I don't know why, but I think that one of the things about my hardware samplers and the computer side, like Contact or Halion or whatever, is they're so easy to use. You just drag. You can get like an audio track off your screen, drag it in, chop it down, and next thing you're playing with something that somebody acoustically recorded a couple of seconds ago, and it's virtually effortless. But if you could somehow have that kind of level of interactivity and ease with the warmth and imperfectness of analog in there as well, I think that there's still a market for that. That would be, a really easy to use sampler with tons of memory, analog filters, and a really nice computer interface to go with it or whatever. So it was as easy to use as the software samplers, but offered something else. Yeah. And it really worked well with these mono synths, modular systems, and obviously your found sounds and whatever. But I don't think it stifled it. I think it took it in another avenue. Granular synthesis was one of the most exciting sound developments I heard. When I first heard that on Omnisphere, the granular stuff, that was a bit of a wow moment for me.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think,
but it wasn't really done by, Roland, Korg, and Yamaha. They were kept doing the same thing over and over, and it's been, Spectrasonics or some other startups that are making plugins that do that stuff. It's not been, Mutable Instruments, again, a single person company. Like, there's not been the big companies that have been exploring that because it's not profitable.
Yeah.
That's why I think it stifled it.
I think that's going to be a problem with the future of synthesis in general. If you think about all the investment that went into developing FM, that was in research for years and years, and it was like slowly making its way into home organs, and then there was like mono prototypes and what have you. I can't see Roland or Arturia going that in depth developing a new form of synthesis now, because they're losing money while they're doing it. It's like, right, what can we take that's going to make a lot of money very quickly? And that's to the detriment of innovation, I think.
Yeah, because like you say with FM, if Yamaha came out tomorrow with a new synthesizer technology like they did with FM originally, so GS1s, GS2s, and the little CE chorus ensemble things. They did that today, they'd be laughed out of town, and they'd abandon. They'd drop the idea like a shot, because it would just have that perception that it's just, that's not very good, is it? It's only monophonic. It sounds a bit cheesy. It's only presets. But they did it back 30, 40 years ago, and it was a different time, and you could develop and make it better, and then eventually they hit pay dirt with the DX7. But I think nowadays it's just too people are too cynical. Maybe people want too much, and they want it perfect first time.
But what if Yamaha had come up tomorrow with a what's it called, that Essence FM that you and I still rate about, and called it a DX8?
Yeah. Well, I was wondering this the other day, whether, and we're going to come on to this as the last or the penultimate kind of topic, is, rejuvenating old technologies, and could, any of the manufacturers, because Yamaha seem to have resisted, really. And to their credit, I suppose, in a way, because, Roland don't chase analog ghosts when they chase analog ghosts. And Korg have kind of gone down the route of reissuing stuff in plug-in form. Yamaha have just got the reface stuff, which that was kind of it, really. They've really resisted producing anything that is a direct kind of successor to any of those classic, the CSs or the DXs or whatever, the SYs. It would be interesting to see, but we'll come on to that let's do that now, because what's the time? So it's coming up to 9:30. We've got about half an hour left, so let's do these two. So the cyclical nature of synthesis methods. So what I want to get from you guys is where you think the next cycle is, where we are on particular cycles, because you look at analog synthesis, it was the be all and end all, 60s through 70s, and I know that synthesis existed before then, but we're going to kind of take it in its popular sense. So it was all about analog synthesis, and then it grew. We had polyphony. We ended up getting digital oscillators, and we started getting a little bit better at doing it. But then digital synths came along, and all the analog stuff kind of went away, and we all got very excited about digital, and it had its limitations, it had its faults, and it got to a certain point, and then it kind of started to drift away. Physical modelling, that was a very short cycle. That's happened. Then we get back to analog, has come back again, and analog has learnt the lesson of the past, and it's using modern technology to do the things better that it failed to do or couldn't do that well back in the early days. So now they rarely go out of tune, or they have automatic functions that keep them in tune. You don't have to worry about that kind of drifting going, although some clearly do. But we've learned, we're using better hardware, better, as Cryss pointed out earlier, that thing that sits to his right there is an analog synth in pretty much every way, but there's microprocessors in there running computer software, so it's learning all the time and picking up. So to get to my point, where do you think we are in terms of, say, the analog subtractive synthesizer cycle? Do you think it's coming to an end and is kind of just going to drift away and sit over there whilst it learns its lessons from this brand, and digital's now going to come into its place? Do you think maybe it's not? Maybe you think it's not cyclical at all? Ben, what do you think about the cycles of different types of synthesis?
I really like the way that we're getting a chance to own some of the classics, with recently the Prophet 5, Prophet 10, the ARP, the ARP Odyssey. The relaunching of equipment's really good. As for the technology, I don't really. I mean, where could you go with analog now? What could you actually physically do with that to take it anywhere else? I think that it maybe just, if you could give people the analog sound and imperfections, but like masses of polyphony, that'd be a great move for people. But I kind of think of classic synths, like I said in a show a couple of weeks ago, they should be treated in the same way as like classic guitars. If you want a Prophet 5, the fact that it came out first of all in 1980 whatever, then you should be able to have one. If it's a classic and it's still desired by people and people still aspire to have it, then why not still be able to get it? I don't think that the nature of the machine is any less just because it's old. It's still that great machine. I'd like to see. I mean, Yamaha asked a while back, would you be interested if we remade the CS80? Yeah, I think loads of people would be. I think especially because it's made by Yamaha. I think like if Behringer made the BS80 or whatever it's going to be called, that more people would desire the Yamaha one because they'd feel it was authentic. It's not a cheap. It's like the difference between a cheap Strat clone and a real Fender Strat. It's what one. They're both similar, and for that person, it's probably good enough. But for somebody who wants a real thing, they would love a real Prophet 5 or a real CS80, but like not necessarily the maintenance that comes with those old types.
So you're basically saying that that cycle of development has now meant that we can now own these kind of classic instruments or versions of these classic instruments because they are more maintainable, more reliable, maybe more affordable. So do you think
more connectable?
Yeah, absolutely. So do you think that analog synthesis, because it has had this massive resurgence over the last, 15 years or so, in lots of different ways. Do you think that that's kind of peaked and we're now kind of plateauing or maybe even going, down?
I'm interested, like what happened to the hybrid approach? Like Roland did it with the JDXA, didn't they? They had. You could have analog oscillators or digital oscillators. It seemed as though that was the start of something quite interesting there, but then it kind of fizzled out, and they completely abandoned it for the Zencore stuff. It's like that was a good idea, if you could, like, it's like that Falcon 2 that's just come out. That's got like every possible method of synthesis in it that is in existence, and it seems to work in a system, but obviously it can't do real analog because it's a computer.
Of course.
So the idea of being able to have a PCM generated waveform an FM generated waveform or a real sine wave oscillator or a sawtooth oscillator, that's great.
Yeah.
That could be the way forward, like somebody alluded to in the chat earlier on, that maybe we will have this synth that can cover all things and people aren't bothered where it's coming from, as long as it sounds right.
Yeah. Simon, you're sat there in your infinite synth cave, and behind you there you've got analog and digital. To your sort of behind to your right you've got again more classic analog and digital. Do you think digital synthesis in varying forms, whether it's the Hydra synth or Argon 8 or Wave State or other maybe if Korg come up with the the Op6 version of FM, do you think digital is now on the rise and we're seeing it's going to have its time in the cycle, that we're going to see huge amounts of development in that regard, and companies are going to maybe slightly ignore or spend less time with analog?
Based on what's happened this week and how it's going, I wouldn't bet. That's a $50 million question. I don't think digital's had its day, because I think I've said it jokingly to you that you've started or certainly gone along with the resurgence of FM, and I always said a long time ago that would happen. So no, I don't. I think they're kind of two separate things, really. I think there'll always be an interest in both. I mean, listen, I love things like the Hydra synth coming out and digital analog hybrids. And again, what Ben said, I bought a JDXA because I particularly like the idea of having two separate synth engines in one box. And I mean that by completely separate synth engines, one being analog and one being digital, and given the choice that you could mix or separate the two. And again, I think it was warmly sort of taken on by the general public, but it sort of died a death. I'm sort of, whatever comes out that I think is, wow, that's nice. My favourite at the moment is the Super 6. Now, I really like that because it's digital, but the UI on it is like playing my old Juno 60, and it sounds great. So for me, and I am particularly lazy about learning new stuff because I'm just getting old and bored. My eyesight's not that good, and a million other reasons why. But this thing is like, it's like playing my old Juno 60, and I can relate to everything. So, and again, that Arturia thing that Polybrute, whatever it is. I think it's I can't wait to play that. I'm just a little bit upset about the 6-note thing, but I won't say too much about that because that'll set Cryss off again. But no, it is. Listen, I'm not. I've always said it. I'm not precious about whether it's got rotary knobs on it or whether if it sounds good and it's interesting to me, then I will certainly pay an interest in it. And I think most people are similar. It doesn't really matter if it sounds good and it's different and you think, oh, that's got the wow factor, then I'll go for it. I think
not so much whether it's analog or digital or whatever. Does it sound good? Does it make noises you like?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there is definitely the element of if Yamaha came out with the CX81 or whatever, of course everyone's going to want that because it is a CS80, but if they came out with the I don't know, Christmas Tree 5 or whatever, and it was interesting and I thought that's it, I'd consider it. It doesn't have to be
well, that's a fair point. Cryss, you're kind of definitely your feet are almost firmly both in the analog camp. What are your thoughts on has this analog resurgence had its day? Are things going to slack off? Are they not? What do you think?
Well, actually, I have probably as many digital synthesizers as I do analog.
I'll shut up.
I do enjoy both. I mean, that's the point of it. And it's great as far as the far future of synthesis is all digital, hands down, no sweat. Now, in the next, in this between now and this next decade, is the future analog or digital? And the answer is yes. I think main thing is going to be combinations of things. And I see this, the synth market is following about a quarter of a century behind the guitar market. And I'm not talking technologically because they're both doing component modeling and all sorts of stuff. And they're both looking to the past, vacuum tubes for the guitar amps, all that, and still going towards the future with digital modeling. But the cycle of the market is about 25 years behind guitars. And so what happened is that there was this, we need to get back to the good things, the good sounding things of the past. So those got rebuilt, but all the features that we hated about the old stuff got fixed and things got better. And then after that, like in the early 2000s, we just had this mash of the same thing in hundreds of different forms. How many times can you build a slightly tweaked, tube screamer? And we're beginning to see that as well. And then you start having the combos of things like Fender R&D is kind of a joke. I mean, the Stratocaster that style of guitar is the most popular guitar in the world. And it's a 66-year-old. Well, it's been sold for 66 years. So it was designed in the early 50s. It came out in 1954, and it's still the most popular guitar in the world. Now, how has Fender tried to innovate? There's only so many things you can do to a piece of wood and strings. And so lately they've been, it's almost as though they have a big box of all their parts of all the guitars that they make, and they just randomly reach in and put stuff together. So you have a Tele neck and a Strat body and a Jazzmaster bridge and a P90 pickups, and you just get these all sorts of funky combinations, and some of them work and some of them don't. And that's where I see that this next 5 and 10 years of synthesis is going to be, and I don't mean that for Fender, I think it's kind of a bad thing for them, but for the synth market, I think it can be very fun because now we're getting this type of oscillator. In fact, in the same synthesizer, you're getting virtual analog and you're getting FM, and you're being able to combine them with analog filters, and the other part of the oscillators are digital. And so you're getting this kind of mismatch of all these things, but in that you're really satisfying. People are like, I always wondered what it'd be like if I could really do a lot of FM on an analog synthesizer, or whatever it is. And so overall, what's going to drive the synth and the synthesizers being made is, in a small part, the small manufacturers are going to be the innovators. They're doing interesting things, and they're going to be willing to try and to sacrifice for things that are not profitable. And it won't be until later that you see the big companies, once they see that there's a market for it. And we had ASM come out of nowhere and do this Hydrosynth, which to me is, if you want to see what the immediate future looks like, it's the Hydrosynth. This, like, we've gone back to polyphonic aftertouch. Maybe Fatar will get back on board and start doing that if it's profitable. If all of a sudden Yamaha starts saying, hey, we need some of that, or whoever, I don't know if Yamaha probably doesn't use Fatar, but whoever it is, Moog or whatever, say we need that product, they'll start making it again. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I think the thing that's most important to remember is the musicians are the ones that are ultimately in control of the music. And so synthesis is just a form to a greater goal of making music. And you can have people with the very similar gear. I mean, you think about the early days of rock music, you had Chuck Berry, it was a guitar into a loud amp, and he made rock and roll. And within 10 years, less than that, you have Jimi Hendrix doing the same thing, but just totally blowing everybody's mind as far as what is available. And then 10 years later, you have Eddie Van Halen, who comes out of nowhere and just changes the whole landscape for at least a decade.
Yeah.
So I think that the biggest things that will that And the most important things in all of this conversation are still, what do we do with these tools? These are the tools in which we make music. And so the fun part of it is if we do, if we all of a sudden get the CS80 clones that we all want, or if we get the next new super synthesis that we haven't even conceived or imagined of, it'll all be good for making music.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. It seems to me like it is the small manufacturers that are doing the innovation, that are testing the waters, and are super successful. Some of them aren't so much, and it does test the waters, and then the bigger companies can come in behind. But Andrew Brooks in the chat room said, basically that the next form of synthesis will be driven by profitability. Can you market it and sell enough of it? Rather than, is it an innovative new thing? Are we making something cool because it is just this fantastic way of making sound, or are we making something that can put money in the bank? And that, I think, it's depressing, but at the same time it's true. We don't. If you remember, like the big three, or at the time, Korg, Roland, and Yamaha. They were the most innovative synthesizer manufacturers out there. And then you had the smaller companies that kind of grew up out of that. So, the American companies like Sequential and Oberheim and Moog, and other companies from Japan. But it was these, they were leading the way. They were developing new stuff and seeing if it would fly, and sometimes it did and sometimes it didn't. Now they've become box shifters. They've become makers of the safe products, the workstations, the home keyboards, the electric pianos, things that are just going to constantly sell, and they know they can knock those out, a dime a dozen, and it will just make them money. There's not a huge amount of innovation. And I think when you look at Yamaha, what innovation, what true innovation have they shown recently? Same with Roland. All right, so you might say that ACB Zencore is some kind of innovation, but all they do is replicate the past with that. Korg have been a little different. I think Korg are still, of the three, the most innovative. When you look at the log range, the other things, some of the other things that they've done have been, really innovative. But I think it's depressing that, it's become an industry where it's about making. Well, it's always been about making money, but it's when you read interviews or see interviews with people like Kakahashi-san of Roland, like the people from Yamaha and Korg, those people that were desperate to change the world, or to change the world of music making with their innovation, rather than, and that being the priority over and above money in the bank, staying afloat, keeping the shareholders happy. That was always, for me, that's how it seemed. Obviously, I don't know if that was the case, but I think we should encourage the likes of Kodomo and Twisted Electrons and all these other small companies that produce little niche products, and they test the water, and they try new things, and they see if it floats, and if it does, it seems that other people follow suit, because that's kind of the way it is now. So that's why I'm all for supporting those smaller companies whenever I can. So we're into the last kind of 10-12 minutes here, and I'm conscious that I just want to ask one last question. It's the big $6 million question. I'm going to go around. I'm going to start off with Cryss first, and the question simply is, and I'll just check my notes here, can you predict what might be the next big thing in synthesis? What do you think personally? What's that one big moment, Cryss?
Cryss putting a deposit down on a Prophet 10.
So come on, Cryss, what do you think it might be?
What, in terms of what do you mean?
Well, what's going to be the next big thing? So sampling was a big thing. Digital, synthesis was a big thing. What do you think might be that big, change where everybody's taken by surprise and wow, that's new, that's different. It's speculative. You don't have to be accurate. Yeah. You can be a bit flippant if you want, but what do you think?
I mean, I'll just kind of repeat what I had said. The probably most thing that's been underdeveloped that will become more developed will probably be hybrid synthesizers in terms of both digital and analog together, and also in terms of multiple forms of synthesis. So something like the Quantum is an excellent example of that, or the Hydrasynth. Hydrasynth being digital but having multiple forms of synthesis in it. Things like that, I think, are really what's going to drive. We'll have that in parallel with the classics, coming to fruition in the next few years. This was a big thing to see the Prophet come back. I mean, we've already seen the Mini Moog, but certainly Behringer's doing a lot of the classics that probably guys our age are the one or older are the most interested in. And that's going to probably serve us until we become a much smaller part of the market. And then, from there, I don't think there's going to be as deep of a hold to analog. I think the thing about analog that will survive into digital, is when we go into the digital singularity, I guess, will be the aspects that we like of analog. And Ben talked about this a lot. And I liked. I don't think I don't know if anybody caught it, but you said will analog drift off into whatever, and I thought that was a great pun there. But you had said earlier, Robbie. But I think that's it, because the things that we like about analog, that movement and the unnatural things that become radically natural. I think we'll see digital more and more take on those aspects of natural instruments. And so whereas synthesis has been very synthetic in a way as it's been birthed over the last, how many decades, I think that we'll see it take its a more and more rightful place along with all the rest of the instruments. And the ability to be able to control it like we are able to control acoustic instruments.
Yeah. Nice. Okay, Ben, what do you think is going to be the next big thing in synthesis?
I think it'll be based on success. So, like the Hydrasynth's been quite successful. I think that you might get like more poly aftertouch keyboards because of that. But I think the real groundbreaking developments are going to come from software, because they haven't got, like we're on about that pressure to keep generating a profit, and it's less desirable to take risks because of those pressures. I think that a software company can really go out on a limb and do something that's quite unimaginable. Like, there's things that I didn't think were possible that are now happening, like that RX-8 thing. Like I didn't think that you could do that. So whatever's down the road, it could be something completely mind-blowing, but it is more than likely to come from software. And if that creates a new type of synthesis, when it's proven to be stable and useful, then the big manufacturers might incorporate that into hardware. I think it's going to come from a software angle now.
Okay, cool. And finally, Simon, what do you think the future holds? What do you think this next big thing is going to be?
I'm not entirely sure that there is going to be a big thing like the advent of sampling, FM. Certainly not in my time. I think as computers and software gets more intelligent, then that, as Ben said, I think that is the door that's going to open, and how you interact with it is going to be the biggie. But I don't think that's going to happen in my time. And I'm quite frankly, I wouldn't want it to. Not at because it's a whole new learning, and I think I'm quite happy and perplexed with what I've got already, and having a bash at it for 40 odd years and still not grasping all of it. But I just think with what's happened in the last couple of weeks with Dave Smith releasing what he said he wouldn't do, and I'm actually very glad he has done it. I wouldn't be surprised if there are a few eyebrows raised at Roland, at Yamaha, at possibly even Tom Oberheim, thinking, is it time for me to finally, release a CS80, a Jupiter 8, or a 4-voice, because it's a market that people are still fascinated and still want. And I have to say that on my travels, I went to Sequential or Dave Smith Instruments office 2 or 3 times and had a long chat with Carson about, is Dave ever going to release a Prophet 5? Goes, no, he's never. He just won't. And he's done it, and I'm really glad Dave has done it. I got a little bit of flack from someone off of Facebook about comments the other week, which I would like to clarify. That I've always said this. I'm on the fence with Behringer. I think what they do is good in a lot of respects. I think it gives people the opportunity who don't have thousands of pounds to buy the originals to have very good synthesizers, whether they are good replicas or whatever. That is led to be seen, but as long as they sound good, and I've always said that if they're good little synths, then that's all that matters. But I am pleased it's Dave Smith that's done this, because I think if it's testament to anything, it's the fact that there are a lot of people out there that would love to own a synthesizer like this. And as we've said earlier on, you don't turn it on with your fingers crossed, praying that the thing won't go wrong. Yeah. And that's a £300 tech bill. Yeah. And it's going to last all these years, and it's a lovely bit of furniture. You've only got to look at the Moog 1 sat next to Cryss down there. It just looks lovely. I mean, that's the type of thing that you really could have sat in a studio or wherever, and it just fit in. It blends in anywhere. Yeah. So. Yeah, I think we're going to carry on. We're going to trickle on with some really good stuff coming out, like the Hydrasynth and like the Arturia and stuff like that, and the UDO and stuff like that. But I don't think there's going to be a big volcano explosion of a new type of synthesis, not for a long time. And again, if it does, it's going to need a lot of computing power. Yeah, and that's going to come from, I think, software. Yeah.
I think you're right. I think, and also we spoke about how small developers are, testing the waters. It's the same with software. Software is it's easier to try something new in software than it is in hardware, because you haven't got the whole production process and manufacturing process. Sure, there's a lot that goes into it, but you can test things out. Test a concept out in software far easier than you could in hardware, and if it sticks, then let's do a hardware version of that. Sorry, I cut somebody off.
Oh yeah, and I was thinking, like, when we see things like the Prophet 5 or the Mini Moog reissue that are very traditional recreations of these classics, that some people tend to think, like, why are they wasting their time on that? Why don't they make something that has a little more innovation? But again, it comes down to economics, and I think that they're good moves. And I'm always very hopeful for the next thing when I see those things come out. So we have a Mini Moog, which really helped Moog out. And would we have a Moog 1 if we hadn't had that Mini Moog reissue? I don't think they would have been able to do it monetarily wise. They would have had the ideas. So Prophet 5 comes out, and it's a huge, huge cash injection into Sequential. What's the next Sequential synthesizers going to be like? I bet they're going to be amazing, because they'll have the capital to be able to spend longer time developing something.
Yeah, I do wonder if that was the motivation, because as Simon said, Dave Smith was quite adamant for many years he wasn't going to do that thing, and now he's done it. And you wonder, because one of the things that came out of, I think might have been in Jamie's interview with him yesterday, was that they're working on lots of other stuff. And so, it's not like they've, right, here's the Prophet 5, now what do we do? That's already going on. And I guess somebody somewhere said, look, I reckon that the demand is such that you will sell a ton of these things, and that will give you that cash injection to then go off and make some new designs and something new and innovative. Because let's be honest, what Dave Smith has been doing up till this point so far is reinventing the classics. So the Prophet 6 and the Pro 3s, they're kind of evolutions of old things. One that, so maybe the next one is going to be something completely new, something that's different and innovative, and will surprise us all. Who knows?
I personally hope it's the end of the Prophet.
I would agree.
I think he's bashed that to death. I think it's a good way to go out, and I would like to think now that they do something that's a Dave Smith type of newbie.
Yeah.
Because we've got lots of analog choices now with this thing come out. We've got the small stuff. I think Behringer are imminently about to make an announcement on the 2600 clone, which I think is also going to sell incredibly well.
Yeah.
So I would like to see again, what Cryss was saying, like let's move on and see what he comes up with the digital analog hybrid. Does it really matter if it's a digital analog hybrid, whether it's a banana apple hybrid? Who cares? As long as it sounds good. And that's really where we are, isn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Gentlemen, thank you ever so much. This has been really interesting. I've learned some stuff, and I'm hoping that the audience enjoyed the discussion. They've certainly been really going for it in the chat room and kind of drifting in and out of the same kind of conversations that we're having. And thanks to everyone that's participated in there and thrown suggestions in there. We've picked out a few. I think it's something that all of us could possibly talk about for many hours over copious amounts of alcohol or something similar. So thanks ever so much for joining us. If you're a first-time viewer of this show, then thanks for coming along, and I hope it was because we took part in SynthFest, and maybe you'll bookmark us, subscribe to us, hit that like button and the bell so you get notifications, get that stuff out of the way. We will be back the same time, same place next week. Before I go, what I do want to do is just bring to your attention the SynthFest webpage, which I believe all of the stuff that has been going on this weekend will remain there, I think, until 10 a.m. UK time tomorrow morning. So I think they're doing it for a full 48 hours. So it's from 10 a.m. Saturday through 10 a.m. Monday UK time. So if you go to the site, you'll see the lovely Jane Cayley there has done this wonderful little intro there. And at the top, you've got these drop downs. So you've got the manufacturers, where there's loads of manufacturers with tutorial videos, demonstration videos, and so on and so forth. You've got retailers in there that are offering you limited discounts over the weekend. So, for example, I'll give these guys a plug because I know they'll appreciate it. IK Multimedia are doing 35% off Uno Drum and Uno Synth, and 35% off the cases as well. That's not an insignificant amount of money off of that product. And there are others there: AMS Stands, Blicken, Din Records, GAC and Gear for Music here in the UK, and a bunch of other stuff as well. So go and check those out. And if there's anything you're looking for, you can get some nice little discounts. There's also demonstrations there from Korg and Analog Solutions. I believe that's the Colossus, Novation Peak, and Presonus Studio One. There's the community stuff, so that includes what we're doing tonight, but there was also Robin Vincent's live stream from earlier on today. And there's Ian Boddy from Din Records has got some stuff in there as well. And then Paul Ward has got this feature on, I think it's MIDI control and using something like Cantabile Performer for his live sets. And then, of course, if you fancy 8 further hours of watching the great show that happened yesterday with Jamie, you can watch the entire live stream. If you want to go back and revisit it, he's chaptered it all so that if you want to jump to a specific spot, it's really easy to navigate to there. He's done some stellar work on there. It was really impressive to watch that yesterday.
I really enjoyed his interview with Dave Smith. That's RC, and then he had some other guy on there that looked familiar. Some guy waffling on about IK Multimedia.
Yeah, and he kept popping up. He was on there like 3 or 4 times. It's just like, no, it was great fun. It was really good to be a part of it, and an honour his interview because the registration thing. I get a phone call on Friday from the UK sales guy from IK Multimedia saying, "Look, Della, who's one of the guys in Italy who helped design the Uno synth, he was going to be doing this demonstration. He can't make it. Can you do it?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm already doing all this stuff." And, "Oh yeah, we'll make it worth your while." "Oh, all right then, okay, let's do that then." So and then 5 minutes in, I don't know whether it was me or whether it was Jamie, but my stream froze, and so when I came back, I had to cram everything into like 10 minutes, which was a little bit hairy, but we got there in the end. So anyway, thanks guys. It's been a pleasure, and we will see you same time, same place next week. Do we have a guest lined up for next week? I can't remember.
I don't think so.
No. I know we've spoken to a few people, so it might just be the 3 of us.
Yeah, just the 3 of us next week.
Yep, and we'll catch up with any news that's happened, which we haven't covered today, and we'll catch up with that. The usual waffle and gumph that we normally dish out on a Sunday evening. So anyway, to everybody in the chat room and to everybody that's watching this on catch up, because I know there'll be a whole bunch of people who do, thanks ever so much for tuning in. Hit the like and subscribe buttons and the bells and get along. Simon, thanks ever so much for coming along, mate. It's always a pleasure to see you.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Got to hook up soon, and have a safe week. We will see you all same time, same place next Sunday. Take care. Bye bye.